I bought my parents a seaside mansion worth nearly $1 million, hoping they'd finally have peace. But when I showed up, my mother was crying, my father could barely stand, and my brother's wife was yelling at them to get out and die. My brother? He stood there laughing. They said the house was theirs now, that I had no place there. But here's what they didn't know. I had proof, and I wasn't walking away this time. So, how do you fight for your family without becoming like the ones who betrayed you? The sun was already high when I turned off the Pacific Coast Highway and onto the narrow road that curved toward the cliffs. The ocean stretched out to my left, silver and endless. It had taken me 30 years to get here. Not the drive, but the life that led up to this moment. I'd spent my best years drawing homes for other people, watching them live out dreams I'd only hoped to give my parents. Today, that changed. The house stood exactly the way I'd imagined when I designed it. A long white frame with cedar shutters, the sea wind brushing the glass railings on the balcony. I could picture Mom in her robe, fussing over her roses, Dad setting up his easel in the sunroom like he always said he would when things settle. For once, things had settled. This was supposed to be peace. I parked by the driveway, turned off the engine, and just sat for a second. The quiet was deep, almost too deep. No radio playing from Dad's old speaker, no smell of coffee. I checked my phone again, still no message from Cole. My brother hadn't called in weeks. He'd missed dinner last Sunday, ignored Mom's birthday, and yet, I told myself, as I always did, family comes around eventually. I grabbed the small box with the keys and the envelope containing the title, walked up the path and noticed something that stopped me cold. All the curtains were shut. Mom never shut those. She used to say light was the closest thing to faith. Then I heard it, a voice. No, two voices. Muffled at first, then sharper. A thud followed by silence. My chest tightened. I took the last few steps quickly and pushed open the front door. The first thing I saw was my mother in the corner of the living room, clutching her cheek, her eyes wide and wet. The second was my father on the porch just outside, leaning on the doorframe, one hand on his chest, gasping for breath. And then I heard her. Tessa, my brother's wife, her voice sliced through the air like a knife. You think you can order me around in my house? You'll serve or you'll get out, old woman. She slapped my mother again, loud, final. Mom didn't even cry out, just turned her face away, trembling. I froze where I stood, unable to make sense of it. Every sound drained out of the world. Behind her, leaning against the kitchen doorway with a glass of whiskey, was Cole, my brother, my only brother. He smirked when he saw me. "Well, look who decided to visit," he said. "You finally came to the house you bought. Too bad. It's ours now." The words didn't make sense at first. Ours. How could it be ours? My parents had signed nothing. This was their home. I'd built it for them. Mom tried to stand, whispering something like, "Eli, don't." But Tessa cut her off with a wave of her hand. "Please," she scoffed. "If you wanted to buy love, you should have kept the receipt." I stepped forward, my heart pounding, but Dad's voice came weakly from the porch. "Don't make it worse, son." His hand shook so badly that I reached out and helped him sit. He wouldn't look at me. That was when I really saw it, the living room. Furniture rearranged, my mother's sewing chair gone, the family portraits replaced. On the mantel where our old photo used to hang, Dad in the middle, Mom beside him, me and Cole on either side, now there was a new frame. Cole stood in the center, arm around Tessa, my parents cropped smaller, like footnotes in their own story. My face was gone. I walked closer, the silence pressing in like a weight. The only sound was the faint hum of the waves outside and Tessa's satisfied sigh. "You should have stayed away, Elias," she said softly. "You ruin everything you touch." I didn't answer. I just looked around the room again, memorizing every detail. The carpet stained with spilled wine, the art on the walls replaced with something garish, the smell of cheap perfume where my mother's lavender used to linger. It wasn't home anymore. It was something hollow, something stolen. Cole drained his glass, grinning. "Don't look at me like that. You handed them the keys yourself. What did you expect? You always were the charity case who thought money could buy family." My hands curled into fists before I even knew it. But Mom's eyes met mine, pleading, not for herself, but for me. I let the air out slowly. No shouting, no threats, just silence. I turned, guiding Dad back toward the porch. The sea air hit us both, sharp and cold. He reached for my sleeve, voice trembling. Don't make trouble. Please, just let it go." I nodded, though I couldn't. Not really. I looked back at the house. Sunlight hit the metal casing of the doorbell camera I'd installed weeks ago. One of those new models that backed up to the cloud. I'd set it up myself. No one had thought to disconnect it. I took a deep breath, the salt wind burning my throat. "Every house has walls," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. "And walls remember." I got back in the car, hands still shaking, but my voice steady in my head. And that's when I realized, sometimes silence isn't peace. It's preparation. The engine was off, but my hands stayed gripped on the steering wheel. I didn't blink for a long time. I couldn't. The lights in the house had gone out an hour ago, but I was still parked across the street, swallowed by the night and the ache in my chest. My phone glowed dimly on the passenger seat, playing back a silence more violent than any scream. Tap. Rewind. Play. Again. The doorbell camera's footage loaded, each clip more gutting than the last. There was Cole, 2 days before the anniversary surprise, standing on the front step with 2 moving trucks behind him. He didn't even knock, just unlocked the door and walked in like he owned the place. Tessa followed, barking orders at the movers. "This goes in the master bedroom. No, that ugly painting. Trash it." Then came the part I couldn't unsee. Mom and Dad, standing there, like guests in their own home. She was holding a pie. He had his crossword book tucked under his arm. They hadn't seen it coming. Cole waved a hand, casual. "You'll need to clear out the back rooms. Movers need space. Oh, and this one." He pointed to the sunroom. "My office now." And then Tessa, her voice echoing through the mic, clear as a bell. "Get out of the way, Mara. You're not in charge anymore." No screaming, no resistance. Just a slow nod from my father. Just my mother pressing her palm against the doorframe, right over the initials I'd carved there when the paint was still wet. Her touch lingered for a second. Then she stepped back. Pause. My reflection on the screen looked hollow. "I built them peace," I whispered to myself, "and it became their prison." The morning came too soon. I hadn't slept, just drifted in and out of memory and rage. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked ordinary again, deceptively so, like it hadn't just become a crime scene no one would report. Inside, the smell of overcooked bacon punched through the air. Tessa was at the stove, flipping eggs with the confidence of a longtime homeowner. She wore one of Mom's aprons, the blue one with the little cherries. I'd bought it for her on a road trip in '96. Now it clung to someone else. Cole sat at the table, occupying Dad's seat like it had always been his. Newspapers spread out, coffee in hand. Dad sat at the edge of the room, silent. Mom stood near the counter, pouring orange juice with a grip that barely held. I greeted them, cool, casual, watching. Tessa turned with a fake smile. Well, if it isn't the long-lost golden boy. Decided to grace us with your presence again? Cole chimed in. Relax, little brother. They're happy here. Aren't you, Mom? Mom glanced up, her lips forming the shape of a smile, but not the sound. When she finally said yes, it cracked halfway through. I sat down across from Cole, watched the way he stirred his coffee like he wasn't robbing the people who raised us. I leaned in. Where's the deed, Cole? He didn't flinch, just smirked. Does it matter? They live here. We live here. Family, right? That word. He said it like a weapon. Tessa set a plate down in front of me. You misunderstand, Elias. This is our house. We're just letting them stay out of kindness. Nobody's forcing them. They're free to go whenever. Mom's hand trembled. She spilled a little juice. No one moved to help her. I looked at my father, waiting for him to say something, anything. But his eyes never met mine. They'd erased me from the photos, from the living room, from the story. Now they wanted to erase me from the truth. Later, while Tessa blasted music in the kitchen and Cole stepped out for a call, Dad pulled me aside. He didn't speak right away, just stared out at the waves crashing beyond the back deck. I tried to stop him, he finally whispered. But he said he'd put us in a care home if we didn't agree. He choked on the last word. I reached for his arm as he stumbled into the chair behind him, coughing into his fist. For a second, I thought we'd have to call 911. I couldn't let that happen to your mother. She's not strong like she used to be. Mom entered the room, eyes darting toward the hallway. Her voice was barely audible. Don't fight them. Not yet. You'll lose everything. They'll spin it against you. I nodded like I understood. But inside, something had cracked. Not a breakdown. A clean, cold shift. The old fear of breaking the family, of causing pain, had dissolved. What took its place was sharper, smarter. That night, the moon was out again, pale and indifferent. I stood on the porch with the ocean humming behind me and the doorbell camera blinking steadily beside me, still recording, always listening. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through the saved clips, the move-in, the threats, the way my name disappeared from every inch of this place. I bookmarked each one, not for revenge, for truth. Fine, I muttered. If the house speaks lies, I'll let it tell the truth. The wind picked up, but I didn't feel cold anymore. I played one more video, the next one in the queue, and that's when I heard it, low, barely audible, but undeniable. A voice, Cole's voice, but not speaking to Tessa. No, whispering to someone else. The moment I heard Cole's voice in that recording, a strange stillness settled over me. He wasn't talking to Tessa. He was whispering to someone, low, deliberate. Something about timing it right and making sure they're too tired to fight. That alone was enough to chill the blood. I didn't recognize the other voice, but I knew one thing. This wasn't just a takeover. It was premeditated, and I was done being the quiet observer. 3 days passed. I said nothing. I played the role, the passive, tired son who let things go. And then, just before sundown, Cole called. "Hey man," he said, light like nothing had ever happened. "We're doing a family dinner tonight. You should come. No drama. Just food. Like old times. I didn't hesitate. Sure, I said. Like old times. That evening, I pulled into the driveway. Porch lights glowed. Too warm. Too welcoming. Inside, I could already hear soft jazz playing. Miles Davis, of course. A lazy track from the Kind of Blue album. Cole's idea of cultured calm. It reeked of performance. The table was set for 6, though only 5 seats were filled. Candles flickered gently. A roast sat steaming in the center like a holiday special. Tessa wore a red wrap dress, hair too neat, makeup too flawless. Mom looked like she'd ironed her blouse twice. Dad wore a sweater vest he hadn't touched in years. They were dressed for company, not comfort. Elias, Cole said, walking over with arms spread like a politician. Glad you could make it. I shook his hand. His grip lingered a second too long. Tessa offered a grin. We wanted to make it special. You've been so distant. Busy, I replied, but I wouldn't miss this. I took the seat directly across from Cole. Between us, a long oak table I'd restored myself, every scratch and groove holding years of family meals. Now it felt like a dividing line. Us versus them. Cole raised his glass, the stem twirling between his fingers. To family, he said. I met his gaze, calm. To truth. He smiled, but the edge of it twitched. Dinner began. Tessa passed dishes like a hostess on a cooking show. She complimented the decor, the lighting, even her own seasoning. You have to admit, she said, I've really brought this place to life. It was so dull before. Cole laughed. Well, Elias has always been generous. Buying a whole house just to visit on holidays, that's next level brotherly love. I let the comments roll off. Mom barely touched her food. Dad kept his eyes on his plate. Every bite was quiet rebellion. Every glance a warning. I studied the room. The family photo above the fireplace. My spot had been cropped out completely. A new one hung there now. Cole in the middle, arms around our parents like the golden child he never was. Every inch of the house had been rebranded. My mother's ceramic vases replaced with modern abstracts. The bookshelf I built with Dad, gone. Even the scent, once cinnamon and linen, now smelled of expensive diffusers and something artificial. Halfway through dinner, the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the conversation like a blade. Tessa scowled. Who the hell is that? No one moved. I'll check, I offered casually. I stood and made my way to the hallway, pulling my phone from my pocket. Instead of opening the door, I tapped into the live feed and rewound to the previous afternoon. Footage I hadn't reviewed yet. I stood there, watching. There she was, Tessa, pushing my mother toward the hallway, her voice sharp, spitting venom. You don't get to tell me how to run my house. I don't care what you used to do here. It's over. You want to stay, you stay quiet, or leave. My mother, clutching a towel, barely managed to steady herself. In the background, I could hear Dad coughing, deep, raspy, struggling for breath. Every word, every frame, caught by that little camera next to the door. Truth, wrapped in silence, waiting to be unearthed. I returned to the table like nothing happened. I sat down, picked up my fork, chewed slowly. I didn't yell. I didn't slam the table. I let the silence speak for itself. After a moment, I looked at Cole. You know, I said, wiping the corner of my mouth with a napkin, this house remembers everything. Tessa rolled her eyes. God, you're dramatic. Cole smirked. Still with the architect metaphors? I smiled faintly. Some structures are built to last. Some just look pretty until they fall apart. Mom glanced up at me, just a second, but her eyes were wet. She understood. After dinner, I helped Dad up from the table. His hands trembled a bit more than usual. I walked him to his room, pulled the blanket up to his chest, and waited until his breathing slowed. Then I stepped into the kitchen, kissed my mother's forehead gently, and whispered, "Not much longer." She didn't reply, but she didn't need to. Outside, the air was colder than usual. The tide had rolled in high, crashing against the rocks with force. I stood by my car, phone in hand. The clip was still open. I renamed the file, Dinner for Deception.mp4. Then I opened my email, attached the video, and sent it to Daniel, my old college roommate turned attorney. No explanation. Just one line in the message. "Keep this safe. I'll tell you when to open it." As I hit send, the house behind me glowed soft and golden like a painting, but I knew better now. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a stage, and every performance has its final act. The night after I sent the footage to Daniel, I barely slept. Not out of fear, no, that stage had passed, but because I kept replaying every word, every pause, every strained glance at the dinner table. Something in me had shifted, but before I could decide what to do with that new clarity, someone tried to dim it all, literally. Around 2:20 a.m., I was in the upstairs guest room, reviewing timestamps on my laptop when the power cut out. No warning, no flicker, just black. The jazz that had been humming quietly downstairs went silent. The small lamp beside me died. Even the soft hum of the refrigerator below vanished. For a moment, the only sound was the ocean, restless, constant. I stood slowly, heart steady but alert. I grabbed my phone and flicked on the flashlight. The hallway was pitch black. I peeked into the main corridor and looked through the front windows. Every other house down the bluff still glowed warm with electricity. Porch lights, kitchen lamps, Christmas lights someone hadn't taken down yet. Only this house sat in darkness. I headed downstairs, avoiding the creaky steps out of habit. I moved through the kitchen, then to the side door near the laundry room, and stepped into the cool coastal air. The sand along the side path was damp from the earlier mist, but I saw them, footprints, bare, deep, fresh. They led straight to the edge of the backyard, where our fence bordered the neighbor's property. I followed slowly, every nerve tuned. Then I heard it. Just past the wooden slats, a cough. Low, raspy, human. "Who's there?" I called out, keeping my voice even. A pause. Then the voice came, slow and gruff. "Name's Henry. I live next door. You Elias Ward?" I stepped closer. The outline of a man emerged under the faint starlight. He looked to be in his 60s, broad-shouldered salt and pepper beard, work boots, worn jacket, hands like sandpaper. "I've seen you around," he added. "Your dad mentioned you." "You knew my father?" Henry gave a small nod. "Not well, but enough." He pulled something from his jacket pocket and held it out over the fence. "He dropped this a few days ago. I figured you should have it." It was a flash drive, small, ordinary. But nothing about this was ordinary. I took it, nodded a quiet thanks, and backed away slowly. Henry said nothing more, just disappeared into the dark. Back inside, I fired up my laptop using the emergency backup battery I kept in my briefcase. The drive loaded fast, one video file, time-stamped 5 days earlier, labeled simply Backyard 1207. It opened to a shaky view of our backyard, taken from a second angle, one I never installed, probably Henry's. Tessa stood near the patio table, arms crossed, voice sharp. Mara was just out of frame, but I could hear her. "I said I'd water the plants in a moment," my mother said, calm but weary. Tessa snapped back, You'll do it now if you want to keep sleeping inside. The background, Cole lounged on a deck chair, drink in hand, face turned away. Then, faintly, Henry's voice, barely audible from across the fence. Hey, enough of that. He's not your servant. Tessa turned toward the sound, voice rising. Mind your business, neighbor. This is my property now. I'll run it how I want. I paused the video. My hands tightened around the laptop edges. Same tone, same poison. But then, just before the video ended, another moment. One that made everything still. My father walked into frame, slowly, carefully, and stepped up to the fence. He didn't look toward the house, just the other side. Henry, he whispered, barely louder than the wind. Please, keep this safe. My son will need it. I stopped the video, and I sat there, not moving. He hadn't given up. He hadn't surrendered. He was waiting. For me. The sky was just beginning to soften to gray when I finally stepped outside again. The chill bit deeper that morning, like the air itself carried a warning. Mara found me sitting on the porch steps, the laptop on my knees, still showing the paused image of Harold's tired, determined face. She sat beside me without a word for a while. Then, softly, he wanted to protect you. Thought if you fought them, they'd destroy you too. I didn't look at her. They already tried. Her hand found mine, a rare gesture, simple but grounding. We kept quiet, she said. Thought silence was survival. But it just made space for them. I nodded, staring out toward the fence. Not anymore. Around 7 a.m., I walked along the edge of the backyard. Henry stood on his side, leaning against a post, coffee mug in hand. You watched it? He asked without preamble. I did. He gave a grunt of approval. Your old man had more spine than he let on. I see that now. We stood for a while in silence, the kind only two men who've seen too much can share. Then Henry said, You've got what you need. Proof. Witness. Just gotta decide what you're gonna do with it. I turned the flash drive over in my palm. This fence used to keep us apart. Now it's where I'll draw the line. Henry raised his mug in a silent toast. Later that morning, I stood at the kitchen counter, the scent of coffee brewing beside me. The house was waking. I could hear Tessa clanging dishes upstairs. Cole's voice floated faintly from the hallway, but I was somewhere else. I opened the drawer beneath the old spice rack, one few people ever used. I reached behind the row of mismatched salt and pepper shakers and found what I'd tucked there years ago. A thin folder. Inside, the original paper deed, still crisp, still bearing my name. The memory hit me like a wave crashing against rock. The old filing box in my apartment closet. I hadn't opened it in years, not since I moved back to San Jose, but I knew exactly what lay buried inside. I left Monterey early that morning, the sky still holding on to dawn, and made the drive up the winding 101 like a man chasing ghosts. By the time I walked into my apartment, the sun was cutting sharp lines through the blinds, slicing across unopened mail and old drafting equipment. It felt like stepping into a different life, one where things still made sense. I pushed aside the boxes of tax folders, past due statements, blueprints for homes that were never built. And there it was, a worn black metal box, its corners dented, its key taped to the bottom like a lazy afterthought. Inside, among faded documents and brittle receipts, I found it. Cream-colored paper, crisp edges, my name in permanent ink. Grant deed of gift, 60th wedding anniversary, the house, the land, the clause that stated my parents would retain full residential rights for life. And under grantee, just one name, mine, no mention of Cole. No mention of Tessa. No shared ownership. No legal loophole. I remembered signing it in a quiet office with my lawyer and a notary. I remembered my mother holding my hand while my father cleared his throat and muttered, "He's doing too much." And I remembered saying, "It's not too much if it gives you peace." Now, staring at the raised seal pressed into the bottom right corner, I whispered, "This isn't just a piece of paper. It's the line between truth and theft." That same afternoon, I drove back. The mansion stood under the same sun, the same ocean breeze curling through the pines, but the silence it carried wasn't the same. It felt like the breath before a storm. I didn't knock. Cole was stretched out in the sunroom, a glass of whiskey in hand despite the hour. Tessa sat nearby, phone in one hand, legs tucked beneath her on the couch. Neither of them moved when I stepped in. I walked straight to the oak dining table and laid the envelope down with deliberate care. The weight inside wasn't heavy, but it felt like granite in my hand. "You've been living in a house that doesn't belong to you," I said evenly. Cole didn't even sit up. He let out a dry laugh. "Oh, come on. Are we doing this again? You gave it to them, remember? Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad." "I did give it to them," I said. My voice didn't rise. "Not to you." Tessa rolled her eyes. "Still clinging to that martyr routine, Elias? You disappeared for 10 years and now you want to play hero?" I ignored her. I opened the envelope, unfolded the deed, and placed it carefully on the table so the seal caught the sunlight. They both stared. Twist S7 had arrived. "This is the original deed," I said. "It's notarized, filed, legal. It names me as sole owner and states clearly that Mom and Dad have the right to live here for the rest of their lives." I turned the paper so it faced them. "There is no clause for co-ownership, no transfer, no right of occupation to anyone else, especially not you." Tessa stood up sharply. "You think a piece of paper changes anything? We live here. We take care of them. That's what matters." "That paper means everything in court," I replied. "And you don't take care of them. You terrorize them." Cole's jaw clenched. "You wouldn't dare? You'd drag the whole family into a lawsuit?" I stared at him, calm, steady. "No need to drag anyone. The law walks in on its own when it sees fraud." Behind them, I noticed movement. Mara had come into the room, her hand gripping Harold's arm. Her eyes landed on the deed, then flicked up to mine. "It's finally over," she said, barely above a whisper. Harold didn't speak, but he raised one trembling hand and placed it flat on the table next to mine. It was the smallest gesture, and it said everything. But I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I looked at both of them, straight into their smug, cracking facades. "I'm not throwing you out today," I said. "Not because I can't, but because I want you to understand what comes next." Tessa opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. She stopped. "From this moment," I continued, "you will not speak to them the way you have. You won't raise your voice. You won't touch anything that isn't yours. Because if you do, next time, I won't come alone." There was no threat in my voice, just truth. And truth lands harder than threats. Cole didn't answer. He just stared, his smirk gone. Tessa said nothing, but her eyes flicked to the deed again, calculating. Behind me, I felt my father's grip tighten, ever so slightly. He was still standing, still proud. I stepped out onto the porch. The sun had lowered, casting long golden fingers across the gravel path. From behind the door, I heard Cole murmur, "He's bluffing." Then Tessa's voice, flat. "Then why did his voice shake less than yours?" I smiled. As I turned to leave, I saw Henry by the fence, hands in his jacket pockets, watching like a man who'd seen this movie before. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. Just a nod. Quiet. Solid. The kind of nod that says, "You're doing what needs to be done." I gave him the same in return. No words. Just understanding. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's precision. And this was just the first move. I barely slept that night, not because I was afraid, but because I knew what was coming. The following morning, I left San Jose before the sun had risen. The coastal road was quiet, the sky still wearing its pale gray pajamas. I arrived at the mansion around 7 a.m., expecting silence. Instead, I saw 2 sheriff cruisers parked out front. My stomach clenched. I stepped out of the truck slowly, taking in the scene. Tessa stood at the top of the porch stairs, arms folded tightly across her chest, lips pressed into a performance of indignation. Behind her, Cole paced like a caged animal, hair unkempt, his voice rising and falling with accusation. Then the driver door opened on one of the cruisers, and a familiar figure stepped out. "Morning, Elias," said Officer Ana Ramirez. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes gave her away. She recognized the setup. "We got a call about a disturbance. Possible elder abuse. Name flagged was yours." I looked past her to Cole and Tessa. Of course. "She's trying to turn this whole thing around," I said calmly. But I came prepared. From under my jacket, I pulled the brown envelope I'd carried for days. The deed, the footage, Henry's written testimony. I handed it over without flinching. "This house is under my name, has been for years. My parents are the only ones with lifetime rights to stay. These 2... I turned to look at Cole and Tessa. "Are guests who overstayed their welcome." Ramirez flipped through the documents, her eyes narrowing. "Mrs. Tessa Ward," she said, stepping forward. "Can you explain why your name doesn't appear anywhere on this deed?" Tessa blinked fast. It's a misunderstanding. Elias knows we live here. We've been helping with the house, helping his parents." Cole interrupted, voice louder now. "He gave it to us verbally. At dinner last year, he said it was ours." Ramirez closed the folder and looked them both squarely in the eye. "Property law doesn't work on dinner conversations." Twist S8 had landed. A few neighbors had already started gathering along the sidewalk, coffee cups in hand, drawn in by the cruisers and the early morning commotion. I spotted Henry leaning on his fence, arms crossed, quiet as ever, his presence enough. Tessa raised her voice, shrill now. "You can't just take everything from us." "I didn't take anything," I replied. "You did." The deputy standing by Ramirez stepped forward. "We'll need you to start packing your personal belongings. If you have an attorney, you can contact them. But you'll need to vacate the premises until further notice." I saw Mara standing just inside the doorway. Her eyes were glassy, lips trembling. She wasn't crying from sadness. She was crying from the sheer relief of being believed. Harold was behind her, upright, supported by his cane. He placed one hand on my shoulder. "You did it right, son," he whispered, "without breaking, like I did." Then, just as the deputy turned back toward the porch, I felt a sharp shove in my chest. "Cole." "Think you're better than me?" he spat. "You always wanted to humiliate me." I didn't move. I didn't lift a hand. Ramirez was on him instantly, pulling him back, her voice stern. "This is not the time." Cole's hands shook, but it wasn't from rage anymore. It was something else. "It was supposed to be mine," he yelled, cracking under years of resentment. "Dad promised. He said I'd get everything. The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. He wasn't protecting anyone. He wasn't surviving. He was just jealous. Twist S9 wasn't shouted. It broke out of him like a confession he couldn't bottle any longer. All those years of second place. All the times I stayed quiet, thinking it would keep peace. And he still hated me for it. By noon, the house was quiet again. Tessa and Cole had been escorted out, each in separate vehicles, with nothing more than a single duffel bag of clothes. The rest would be handled by lawyers, officers, and time. Mara sat by the front window, the one with the clearest view of the ocean. I sat next to her, knees bent, head bowed. "I never wanted a war," I said. Her fingers found mine and squeezed. "Sometimes," she said gently, "peace needs a defender." I looked out past the water, where the horizon finally looked open again. Light danced over the waves like it hadn't in weeks. Outside, Henry waved goodbye to the officers, then turned his head toward the porch. He gave me that same nod. No words, no fuss. Just recognition. From one man who stood his ground to another. I stepped out onto the porch again, the wind picking up, briny and sharp. This place still stood tall, stronger now. I knew it wasn't over. Not completely. Not yet. But today, the law came through the door. And this house, it remembered who it belonged to. The storm came in just past midnight. I'd been staring at the ceiling for over an hour, listening to the shifting timbers of the old house groan with every gust. The rain tapped the windows like fingers drumming to a song only the past remembered. That's when I heard the knock. It wasn't loud, just 3 soft raps, hesitant, like someone hoping no one would answer. I sat up, swung my legs to the floor, and walked to the front door barefoot. The wood felt cold beneath me. When I opened it, wind rushed in, and so did a ghost. Cole stood there, soaked through. His jacket clung to him like it had lost the will to protect. Water dripped from his hair. His eyes were red, not from rain, but from what rain couldn't wash away. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. "I didn't know where else to go," he said finally, voice low and cracked. I didn't say a word. I stepped aside. He entered slowly, like a man approaching his own judgment, not out of kindness, but because some endings deserve a witness. The fire was down to embers, but I stirred it back. Cole sat near the hearth, the flames casting his face in a strange mix of warmth and regret. The same floor he once declared his, now soaked beneath his boots. "I messed up," he muttered. "Lost everything. Tessa's gone. The kids don't answer my calls. Got let go last week." He gave a bitter chuckle. "Guess I finally got what I deserved." I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching him unravel. He didn't look like the man who shouted on that porch days ago. He looked like the boy who once scraped his knees chasing seagulls down the beach. "I thought Dad loved you more," he went on. "That house, it was like proving I mattered." I spoke quietly. "You didn't need to steal love to earn it." Twist to S10. The brothers' confession settled in the room like fog. This wasn't greed. This was a boy lost too long in his own reflection. I crossed the room and pulled an old photo album off the shelf. The spine was cracked, the leather worn. I flipped to a page near the middle, then turned the book toward him. 2 boys, arms full of driftwood, laughing on the same beach behind this house. Him, 2 inches taller. Me, missing a front tooth. "Do you remember this?" I asked. He nodded, a ghost of a smile at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, before everything got complicated." "It didn't get complicated, Cole. You made it cruel." He stared into the fire. "You're right." A beat passed, then he looked up again. his voice smaller now. "I can't fix what I did, but please, don't let them hate me forever." His tears weren't dramatic. They just fell, like a man too tired to stop them. I don't know what softened first, my fists or my spine, but something let go. "I don't hate you," I said, "but I can't save you either." Cole nodded. That was the difference now. He didn't fight back. He accepted the weight. From the hallway, soft footsteps. Mara appeared, wrapped in her old robe. She looked at Cole like someone might look at a box left on the curb in the rain, damaged but not discarded. She handed him a towel and said one word: "Eat." He took it, eyes wide, like he hadn't expected even that. From the far corner, my father's voice. "Sit down." Cole obeyed. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, fragile, honest. Outside, the storm began to quiet, as if even nature had paused to breathe. Cole stayed the night in the old guest room, same one where our uncle used to crash when life got too hard. Funny how cycles repeat. I lay in bed listening to the ocean grind against the rocks. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't running mental chess games, no strategies, no moves, just quiet wondering. Can someone really change? Or do they just tire of fighting the same battles? By the time the sky began to lighten, he was gone. In the kitchen, beside the sink, I found two things: his wedding ring and a note scribbled on the back of a grocery list. For once, I'm walking away without taking something. I stared at it a long time. The ring sat heavy in my palm, warm from his skin, cold from everything else. I walked out to the edge of the cliff behind the house. The wind was sharp, but clean. With one flick of my wrist, I threw the ring into the sea. It vanished without a sound. The morning was quiet. Not the kind of silence that comes from emptiness, but the peace you earn after the storm. Light poured through the kitchen window, catching the edge of Mara's teacup as she set it gently on the counter. I was at the table, flipping through a small stack of unopened mail we'd been ignoring for days. Most of it was junk: flyers, overdue notices, insurance offers with fake handwritten names on the envelope. Then I saw it. A plain white envelope with the county seal on the corner. Monterey County Recorder's Office. I opened it slowly, more curious than concerned, but the first line stole the breath from my chest. Notice of title amendment. Property ownership dispute under review. My hand froze mid-page. My eyes scanned again, slower, refusing to believe what I just read. According to the letter, someone had submitted a new deed, one that claimed the house now belonged to Cole Ward. "What?" I whispered. How could this even exist?" Mara turned from the stove, her smile fading. "What are you talking about?" I held the letter up. "They're reviewing a new deed. Someone refiled ownership. In his name." Her face went pale. "You mean he's trying again?" No answer seemed fitting. I just stood there, the warmth of the morning now replaced with a chill in my spine. I didn't even finish breakfast. By the time the courthouse opened, I was already parked outside in a fogged-up car, gripping the steering wheel so tight it creaked. Inside, the same clerk who'd processed my parents' original deed 20 years ago looked up with tired kindness. "Elias Ward?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. "I heard there was a filing under your parcel." I nodded. "I got the letter. It's a mistake. It has to be." She typed for a moment, then frowned. "Ah, yes, a new deed was submitted last week. Hand-delivered." "By who?" "A woman named Tessa Ward." My stomach turned. "It's fake," I said, trying to stay calm. "She forged it." She glanced up at me. "It looks off. The signature is shaky." Doesn't match previous filings, but the way it's filed, it still triggers a review period. You'll need to petition to challenge it formally. Twist S11. The forged deed. I could almost hear Tessa's voice in my head. If you won't give it to me, I'll take it another way. 3 days later, we were in court. It wasn't a grand trial, just an emergency hearing in a small room that smelled like paper and old wood. The judge sat in a simple robe, glancing between the two sides like someone used to nonsense, but still open to justice. Tessa wore confidence like cheap perfume. She walked in with a folder clutched to her chest and a smug look that told me she thought she'd already won. Cole wasn't there. I stepped forward first. "Your Honor," I said calmly, placing the original deed, flash drive with footage, and Henry's sworn statement on the desk. "This is not about property. It's about dignity. About a promise I made to my parents." Tessa didn't wait for permission to interrupt. "He's lying. He made up that deed. Mine's the real one. My husband signed it years ago." The judge barely blinked. "Ma'am, your husband's name doesn't appear on the original ownership filing. There is no legal precedent for this transfer." She grew louder. "You're just siding with him because he's charming and quiet and knows how to play the hero." "Enough," the judge said. They called in a handwriting analyst. The moment the signatures were placed side by side, the game was over. The forgery was obvious. Twist S12, Justice Unmasked. For once, the system saw through the show. The judge ruled within minutes. Property ownership remains with Mr. Elias Ward. The document filed under Ms. Tessa Ward is confirmed fraudulent and will be subject to criminal investigation. Tessa stood there stunned, like the ground had disappeared beneath her heels. "You think this makes you better?" she hissed. "You think they'll love you more now?" I looked at her with nothing left to prove. "No, it just makes me free," she screamed as the bailiff approached. "You'll regret this. You'll all regret this." But her voice dissolved into the empty hallway. That night, the fire crackled in the hearth, as if trying to warm more than just the room. Mara sat curled up with a blanket around her knees, eyes on the flicker. My father sat across from me, sipping from a chipped mug. The house felt still, not just from silence, but from release. "Is it over?" Mara asked softly. "Legally, yes," I said. "Emotionally, maybe not." Harold looked over. His eyes were tired, but finally at peace. "Peace doesn't erase pain," he said. "It just gives it a place to rest." I didn't answer, just looked out the window at the dark horizon beyond the cliffs. The waves were calm again, brushing the shoreline like the world had finally exhaled. I stepped outside onto the porch, letting the wind hit my face. It wasn't cold anymore, just real. And as I stood there, I whispered the words my father had once told me. "Home isn't the walls. It's what you protect inside them." The air that morning smelled like salt and pine and something I couldn't quite name, something settled. I stepped out onto the porch barefoot, coffee in hand, expecting nothing more than the usual crunch of gravel under passing tires or the sound of gulls scouting for breakfast. But there it was, a small wooden box placed gently by the front door as if someone had known exactly where I'd look. Weathered edges, a brass latch, and carved into the top, 3 simple letters, HW. I stared for a moment, unsure if I was still dreaming. Then I saw the note taped to the lid, written in my father's unmistakable hand, "For when the noise finally stops." My breath caught. The porch step creaked under my weight as I sat, coffee cooling in my lap. I didn't open the box right away. I just sat there holding it, feeling its weight. Not heavy, but solid. like it had waited patiently for this moment. Eventually, I flipped the latch. Inside were folded letters tied with twine, a handful of faded photographs, and a small brass compass that still smelled faintly of salt and tobacco. The kind Harold always kept in his coat pocket back when he used to fish before dawn. The first letter opened like a whisper. If you're reading this, it means you've stood where I once stood, between peace and pride. I paused, knuckles brushing my cheek where a tear had fallen. His voice lived in every word, not the man who gave lectures or warnings, but the man who knew silence better than speech. I was hard on Cole because I saw myself in him. All fight, no compass, and I leaned on you because you were steady. That was my mistake. I turned your strength into a burden. Each line peeled back something I'd carried for years. Blame I thought I'd earned. Guilt I'd worn like a second skin. You were the anchor, son. And anchors aren't meant to shine. They're meant to hold when everything else drifts away. I didn't realize I was crying until Mara's hand rested gently on my shoulder. She must have heard the front door, or maybe just felt the shift in the house. "He left that for you?" she asked softly. I nodded, handing her the compass. She turned it in her palm, eyes glinting in the morning light. "Then maybe it's time to find where it points." I held it up. The needle wobbled briefly, then settled, unwavering, straight toward the ocean. "Always home," I said. Later that morning, I walked the short path down to the shore, bare feet pressing into damp sand. The tide was gentle, drawing long, slow breaths against the rocks. I pulled something from my pocket. A familiar shape, cold against my skin. Cole's wedding ring, the same one I'd flung into the sea during the last storm, thinking I was done with everything he represented. But the ocean had its own way of returning what needed finishing. The ring had washed ashore 2 days ago, glinting like a memory that refused to stay buried. I stood at the edge of the surf and watched the water rise, foam curling around my toes. Then, holding the ring one last time, I whispered, "Rest, brother." And I let it go. This time, it didn't feel like rage or surrender. It felt complete. By noon, the house had warmed with the sun. I came back up the path, sand stuck to my ankles, salt still clinging to my sleeves. Harold was in his usual chair by the window, pretending to read the newspaper, but mostly just staring at the pages. Mara poured coffee, humming something old under her breath, something she used to sing while cooking dinner on Sundays. I joined them, no words needed, just the quiet hum of a family mending in its own way. Outside, the gulls circled lazily above the cliffs. The sea sparkled in a way I hadn't noticed in years. Not because it hadn't been beautiful, but because I'd been too busy surviving to see it. I thought about everything we'd lost, and everything we'd managed to keep. They had trusted me with a house, but more than that, they'd trusted me with the meaning of home. I looked at them, at the lines in their faces, the calm in their gestures, and knew this was the real inheritance, not land, not wood or stone, but this silence, this clarity. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt, pine, and something almost holy. I closed my eyes. Some gifts aren't meant to be returned, only understood.